The enemy fleet moved like a black tide, swallowing everything in its path. Hundreds of warships, bristling with weapons, pushed forward through the void, their engines burning like dying stars. The human defenders were outnumbered 10-1. Every projection, every strategic analysis pointed to the same grim outcome: total annihilation. The Terran fleet had fought valiantly, but their ships were falling one by one, torn apart by the enemy's relentless assault. Admiral Kane stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, his knuckles white as he gripped the railing. Reports flooded in. Destroyers lost, battlecruisers burning, their crews lost to the vacuum of space. His officers worked feverishly, but there was no stopping what was coming. He had led fleets into impossible battles before, but never like this. This wasn't just a fight. This was the end of humanity's last stronghold. And then it appeared. A massive distortion rippled across the battlefield. The enemy ships faltered, their formations breaking as sensors screamed in protest. Something had just emerged from slip space, something so large that it blocked out entire sectors of starlight. It wasn't on any records. No fleet registry. No official documentation. Yet, every Terran officer recognized it instantly. The Iron Requiem. It was a name whispered in military circles, a ghost ship of legend. No one knew where it had come from, only that it had vanished during the First Zalnari War over a century ago. Some said it had been destroyed. Others claimed it had been pulled into another dimension. But there it was, impossible, terrifying, and very much real. The Iron Requiem dwarfed any warship in existence. Its hull, blackened and battle-scarred, carried the marks of wars long forgotten. Its weapon systems, silent for 100 years, now pulsed with energy, awakening like a slumbering giant. And at its command was a single voice, a voice Kane had heard before but could never forget. "This is Captain Elias Rourke." The transmission crackled through every human channel, deep and steady as if time had never touched it. "Terran fleet, hold the line. We'll take it from here." Admiral Kane felt his breath hitch. Elias Rourke had been dead for 100 years. He had gone down with the Iron Requiem when it disappeared. There was no possible way. But there was no time for disbelief. The Iron Requiem moved, faster than anything that size should have been able to. Its massive cannons lit up the void, sending bursts of plasma and rail fire ripping through the enemy's front lines. Zalnari warships crumpled like paper. Shields that had shrugged off human weapons for years shattered in an instant. The impossible warship had returned, and it was angry. The enemy fleet hesitated for the first time. Their advance faltered as the Iron Requiem cut through their forces like a blade through flesh. The ship was fighting with an efficiency that no AI, no fleet admiral could match. It moved with purpose, with fury, as if it had been waiting for this moment, for this battle. Kane's officers shouted in disbelief. "Sir, how is this possible?" He didn't have an answer. But he knew one thing: the war wasn't over. Not yet, because the myth had become real. And the Iron Requiem had returned to finish what it started. Admiral Kane barely registered the chaos around him. His mind was locked onto the impossible sight before him. The Iron Requiem was not only real, it was fighting like a ghost possessed. Every move, every strike was precise, almost unnatural in its efficiency. The Zalnari fleet, once an unstoppable force, was suddenly on the defensive, scrambling to adapt to a ship that by all logic shouldn't exist. The bridge of the Vanguard was filled with urgent voices. Officers relayed reports, tracking the battle as the Iron Requiem carved through the enemy ranks. The Zalnari weren't running, not yet, but they were hesitating, breaking formation. And in war, hesitation was as deadly as a direct hit. Kane forced himself to focus. "Open a direct channel to that ship," he ordered. A lieutenant nodded and worked quickly. A moment later, the crackling voice returned. "Negative, Admiral. We're on a secure line," Rourke's voice replied, calm as if he had never left. "Focus on keeping your fleet alive. We'll handle the rest." Kane felt a chill. The voice was familiar, but there was something wrong. Something just beneath the surface, like an echo of what it once was. He took a slow breath. "Elias, if that's really you, then I need to know what's happening. Where the hell have you been?" There was a pause, just long enough to be unnatural. "Not the time, Kane," Rourke finally said. "Stay out of our way." Then the line cut. Kane clenched his jaw. That wasn't an answer. That was a warning. The Iron Requiem surged forward again, its main batteries unleashing another volley. The Zalnari tried to retaliate, but their weapons barely scratched the warship's armor. It was as if it had been reforged in something far beyond human technology, something that didn't belong in this era. "Sir," a tactical officer called out, his voice laced with uncertainty. "That ship isn't broadcasting any known IFF codes. And the energy readings, they're not normal." Kane turned. "Define not normal." "Fluctuations all over the spectrum. It's almost like," the officer hesitated, "like the ship isn't fully here." The words sent a ripple of unease through the bridge. Kane didn't respond. He didn't need to. They were all thinking the same thing. A ship that had vanished for over a century. A captain long presumed dead. Technology that shouldn't exist. Something had happened to the Iron Requiem. And whatever it was, it had changed everything. Across the battlefield, the Zalnari were finally adapting. Their larger capital ships were moving into a new formation, one designed to focus fire on a single target. Their intent was clear. The Iron Requiem had become their priority. "Sir, they're locking onto it," another officer reported. Kane didn't know whether to warn Rourke or watch and see what happened next. But before he could decide, the Iron Requiem made its move. It disappeared. Not into slipspace. Not through conventional cloaking. 1 second it was there, the next gone like a mirage breaking apart. The Zalnari weapons fired into empty space. Silence filled the comms. Even the enemy hesitated, their formation breaking apart in confusion. Then the ship reappeared, right in the heart of the Zalnari fleet. Before they could react, the Iron Requiem unleashed devastation. Blasts of energy, unlike anything Kane had ever seen, erupted from its hull. Zalnari vessels disintegrated in a chain reaction, their shields failing instantly. The warship moved too fast, too fluidly, dodging incoming fire with an eerie grace. "This isn't possible," someone muttered. Kane couldn't look away. He had seen powerful ships before. He had seen weapons that could wipe out entire fleets. But this wasn't just power. This was something else. Something beyond war. The Iron Requiem fought like it knew the outcome before the battle even started. Like it had already seen every move before it happened. And then Kane understood. This wasn't just an old warship brought back to life. It had learned. It had evolved. And whatever had brought it back had turned it into something more than human. The battlefield was a graveyard of shattered ships and dying embers, but the war was far from over. The Iron Requiem drifted through the wreckage like a phantom, its blackened hull absorbing what little starlight remained. The Zalnari fleet had suffered losses unlike anything in recorded history, yet they did not retreat. They wouldn't. That wasn't their way. Admiral Kane watched the tactical display, his gut churning. He had fought the Zalnari for years. He knew their resilience, their cold, strategic minds. They weren't just regrouping. They were adapting. Their capital ships were shifting into new positions, forming a perimeter that would cut off any possible escape routes. This wasn't desperation. This was a trap. "Sir," the tactical officer called out, voice sharp with unease. "They're setting up a convergence point." Kane saw it too. They were baiting the Iron Requiem, forcing it into a kill box where even a ship of its size and power wouldn't survive. The problem was, he had no idea if the Iron Requiem even cared. "This is insanity," one of his officers muttered. "It's one ship against an entire fleet." No one answered, because deep down they all knew that ship wasn't just any ship. Kane opened a fleet-wide channel. "All units hold position. Do not engage unless ordered." He didn't know what Rourke was planning, but he wasn't about to risk his remaining forces on a battle they couldn't control. His fleet was battered, barely holding together. If the Iron Requiem wanted to fight alone, Kane would let it, for now. The silence was heavy, broken only by the hum of consoles and distant chatter between officers. And then the voice returned. "Admiral Kane," Rourke said, his tone unreadable. "Your fleet is in danger. You need to withdraw." Kane tensed. "Not happening. You think I'm leaving without answers?" Rourke didn't respond immediately. When he finally did, his voice was quieter. "You don't want answers, Kane. You want certainty. I can't give you that." Kane's fists tightened. "I don't need riddles, Elias. I need to know, what are you?" A long pause. Then just 3 words. "Not the same." Before Kane could respond, the Iron Requiem moved. It accelerated straight toward the Zalnari trap, defying every strategic instinct. The enemy fleet responded instantly, tightening their formation, their weapons primed. Plasma lances and rail rounds streaked across space, converging on the warship. Any other vessel would have been obliterated on impact. But the Iron Requiem blinked. Not a warp jump. Not a slip space maneuver. It was as if reality itself fractured around the ship, bending and reforming in a way that no human technology had ever achieved. One moment it was there, caught in the enemy's trap. The next, it had bypassed the entire perimeter, positioned right behind the Zalnari command ship. The enemy's flagship, the Sirathan Warden, was 3 times the size of the Iron Requiem. It was a fortress, the nerve center of the invasion fleet. But as Kane watched, he realized something terrifying. The Iron Requiem had already seen this battle play out before it even began. A single shot fired. Not plasma. Not railgun rounds. Something else. Something that rippled. The Sirathan Warden didn't explode. It folded. Space twisted around it, its hull crumpling inward like a dying star before vanishing entirely. No debris. No wreckage. Just gone. The Zalnari fleet froze. For the first time in Kane's long career, he saw them hesitate in fear. Their commanders, their warships, every single one of them now faced an enemy that didn't obey the laws of war, of physics, of reality. But Kane wasn't celebrating, because he had seen something in that moment, in the way the Iron Requiem moved, in the way Rourke spoke. This wasn't just a warship. It was something else. Something human once. But not anymore. The silence after the Sirathan Warden vanished was unlike anything Admiral Kane had ever experienced. Even the Zalnari, ruthless and unwavering, had stopped moving. Their fleet, once an unstoppable tide, now floated in eerie stillness, like they were struggling to comprehend what had just happened. Kane wasn't sure he understood it himself. One shot, one impossibility, and an entire capital ship was gone, as if it had never existed. This wasn't just advanced weaponry. This was something else. Something that defied reason. On his bridge, his officers whispered among themselves, their voices hushed with disbelief. No one wanted to say it out loud, but Kane could feel their fear. If the Iron Requiem could do that to the enemy, what could it do to them? "Sir," the communications officer said, voice tense. "We're picking up Zalnari chatter." "It's panic." Kane's eyes narrowed. The Zalnari didn't panic. Not ever. Their entire war doctrine was built on ruthless efficiency, calculated aggression. And yet here they were, hesitating, their formations breaking apart. And then they ran. The Zalnari fleet, the same force that had been moments away from wiping out humanity's last line of defense, was retreating. They weren't regrouping. They weren't repositioning. They were fleeing. Kane should have felt relief. This was the moment they had fought for. The enemy's advance was shattered. The war, at least for now, was shifting in their favor. But all he felt was a cold weight in his gut. Because the Zalnari weren't just running from the Terran fleet. They were running from the Iron Requiem. Kane turned to his tactical officer. "Get me a full scan of that ship. I want every detail, every energy reading, everything." The officer nodded and worked quickly. The readout filled the main display. Kane's stomach twisted. "It's fluctuating," the officer said. "Mass, energy levels, structural integrity, none of it's stable. It's like," he hesitated, searching for the right words. "It's like it's not fully here." Kane felt his pulse hammer. "Get me Rourke. Now." The channel opened, static crackling before the voice came through. "Admiral," Rourke said. "I warned you to leave." Kane stepped forward. "What the hell is happening, Elias?" "That ship, this isn't just classified tech." "You're wrong." "You're not." He struggled with the words, but he already knew the truth. "You're not human anymore, are you?" Silence. Then Rourke spoke, quieter than before. "Not in the way you understand." Kane clenched his jaw. "Then make me understand." Rourke exhaled, the sound barely audible through the comms. The Iron Requiem didn't just disappear a century ago. It was taken, pulled into something else. A place outside time, outside space. "We fought there, Kane. We fought for 100 years. Or maybe 1,000. I don't know anymore." Kane's breath caught. "Taken by who?" But Rourke didn't answer that. Instead, his voice grew heavy. "When we finally made it back, we weren't the same. The ship isn't just steel and circuits now. It's something more. And it remembers." Kane's hands tightened into fists. "You mean it's alive?" Another pause. Then Rourke said something that sent a chill through every officer on the bridge. "No, it's awake." The deck beneath Kane felt suddenly unsteady. The Iron Requiem wasn't just a ship. It was something becoming. And it had returned with a purpose. Before Kane could press further, alarms blared across the bridge. His tactical officer's face went pale. "Sir, we've got a new energy spike," from the Iron Requiem. Kane turned sharply toward the display. The ship was shifting again, its hull rippling like a mirage. Its energy signature was climbing, fast. "Rourke," Kane said, his voice edged with urgency. "What are you doing?" Rourke's voice was calm, but there was something beneath it. Something final. "The war isn't over, Kane. The Zalnari aren't the real threat." The sensors screamed in protest. Space around the Iron Requiem bent, distorting like reality itself was breaking apart. The ship was no longer just sitting in space. It was pulling space toward it. Kane's stomach twisted. "Elias, stop." But deep down, he knew. There was no stopping what was coming. Because whatever the Iron Requiem had become, whatever it had learned out there in the void, it was just getting started. The Iron Requiem pulsed like a living thing, its structure twisting, shifting in ways that defied logic. The energy surge climbed higher, spiking off every chart on the Vanguard sensors. Kane had seen ships fire up their weapons, charge their shields, even prime for warp jumps. But this was different. It was as if the ship wasn't just preparing for something. It was becoming something. "Sir," the tactical officer called out, his voice strained, "we have a gravitational anomaly forming around the Iron Requiem." Kane's stomach dropped. What kind of anomaly? The officer's hands flew across his console, pulling up data faster than Kane could process. "It's warping local space, like it's collapsing it inward. If this keeps up, we're looking at a singularity event." "A black hole." Kane's pulse pounded in his ears. "Elias, shut it down. You're about to rip open something we can't close." For the first time, Rourke's voice was strained. "You don't understand, Kane. We have to do this. They left something inside us. It's waking up." Kane felt a cold sweat break across his skin. "Who left something? Who are they?" Before Rourke could answer, the sensors spiked again. But this time, it wasn't coming from the Iron Requiem. It was coming from beyond it. Kane barely had time to process the readings before reality itself tore open. A rift, jagged, unnatural, split through the blackness of space behind the warship. It wasn't like a normal slip-space rupture. There was no shimmer, no controlled distortion. This was violent, unstable. It gaped like a wound in the universe, and from it came shadows. No, not shadows. Ships. But not Zalnari. These were something else. They moved like specters, their shapes indistinct, shifting between forms as if they weren't fully tethered to this dimension. Their hulls were black, not in color but in presence, a void against the stars. As if they consumed light itself. Kane's breath caught. What the hell are those? The bridge was silent. No one had an answer. Then the voices began. Not over the comms. Not from the sensors. But inside Kane's own mind. A whisper at first, like distant echoes in a vast, empty hall. Then louder. Layered. Not one voice, but many. "They see us now." Kane staggered back. He wasn't the only one. Across the bridge, officers pressed their hands to their heads, eyes wide with confusion and fear. The black ships moved, gliding without propulsion, without any indication of thrusters or visible weaponry. And yet, as Kane watched, he knew. These things didn't need weapons. They were the weapon. The Zalnari fleet, once so fearsome, was now nothing more than prey. The alien warships that had terrorized humanity for years were now scrambling, their formations collapsing as they turned to run. Run. Kane had never seen them run like this before. The comms exploded with chatter, Zalnari transmissions intercepted, their voices frenzied, desperate. "Impossible. The Voidborn are here. We are already dead." Kane's blood ran cold. The Zalnari, the most ruthless conquerors humanity had ever faced, feared these things. Not just feared them. They spoke of them like a nightmare given form. The Iron Requiem remained unmoving, its energy still growing, as if it had been waiting for this moment. Kane swallowed hard. "Elias, what did you bring back with you?" Rourke's voice was barely a whisper now. "We never came back alone." The Voidborn ships flickered, their edges distorting, shifting between reality and something beyond it. And then all at once, they attacked. The Voidborn ships struck without warning, without weapons in the traditional sense. There was no flash of energy, no streak of missiles, just silence. The nearest Zalnari warship, a dreadnought bristling with cannons, folded in on itself, collapsing like paper crushed in an unseen fist. No explosion. No debris. Just gone. And then another. And another. The Zalnari fleet was being erased. Kane watched in horror as the enemy they had fought for years was wiped out in mere moments. The Zalnari barely had time to fire back before entire sections of their fleet simply ceased to exist. It was like the Voidborn were undoing them, removing them from reality itself. But Kane didn't have time to process what it meant, because suddenly, the voices in his head weren't whispers anymore. You were never meant to see. Pain lanced through his skull. He staggered, gripping the console for support. Around him, his officers cried out, some dropping to their knees, others clutching their heads in agony. The voices weren't speaking, they were invading. The iron requiem pulsed again, and for the first time since it had appeared, Kane saw something he hadn't expected. It was resisting. The warship's energy surged, crackling through the void like lightning across a dead sky. The space around it shimmered, rippled, like it was pushing back. Kane realized with a cold, sinking dread that the Iron Requiem wasn't just some ancient warship. It wasn't even just a weapon. It was a prison. Elias, Kane gasped, his vision swimming. Tell me the truth. What is that ship? Through the static, through the growing roar of the Voidborn's presence, Rourke's voice came through. It was never a ship, Kane. It was a door. The energy readings spiked again, so high that Kane's displays overloaded, shutting down in bursts of static. The Iron Requiem wasn't just resisting the Voidborn, it was trapping them, pulling them back. They sent us back, Rourke said. But we weren't alone. They tried to come through, but the ship, it held them inside. His voice shook. We never won our way home, Kane. The Iron Requiem dragged us back, because it needed to close the door. Kane's heart pounded. Then why are they still coming through? Because it's not strong enough, Rourke whispered. Not yet. And then Kane understood. The ship hadn't come back to save humanity. It had come back because it needed something else, something it had lost when it was first taken. People. The original crew had been consumed, changed, warped into something else during their time in the void. They weren't enough anymore. The Iron Requiem needed new minds. New strength. It needed them. Kane took a staggering step back. Elias, tell me you didn't. Rourke didn't answer. And then the ship opened. Not physically. Not in any way the human mind could understand. But Kane felt it. The bridge flickered, the walls turning translucent for a moment, revealing something behind them. A space between spaces. A place where the Voidborn waited. And suddenly, Kane knew why the Zalnari had run. The Iron Requiem wasn't a warship. It wasn't even a myth. It was a warning. And now it had chosen. The last thing Kane heard before everything went white was Rourke's voice, distant, almost sad. Don't fight it, Kane. We were always meant to be part of it. And then, silence. Kane awoke to silence. No alarms. No static-filled voices. Just the deep, empty quiet of space. For a moment, he wasn't sure if he was still alive. The last thing he remembered was the Iron Requiem opening, something pulling at him, at all of them. But now, as his vision cleared, he found himself still standing on the bridge of the Vanguard. Except something was different. The screens were dark. The hum of the ship's systems was gone. His crew was there, but they were frozen, unmoving, some mid-step, others slumped over consoles. His breath hitched. Were they dead? He reached for the nearest officer, his hand trembling, but the moment he touched her shoulder, she stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, dazed, like she had just woken from a deep sleep. Then, one by one, the others followed. Murmurs filled the bridge, confused voices overlapping. They were alive, but none of them knew why. Admiral, the comms officer whispered. The Iron Requiem, it's gone. Kane turned sharply toward the main viewport. Where the massive warship had once loomed, there was nothing. No wreckage, no lingering energy signatures. Just empty space, as if it had never existed at all. And the Voidborn? Gone. No trace of them, no distortions, nothing. What happened? Someone asked, their voice filled with disbelief. Kane didn't know how to answer. His head still throbbed with the echoes of something vast, something beyond comprehension. He had felt it in those final moments, not destruction but closure. The Iron Requiem had taken them back. It had sealed the door. A new voice crackled through the speakers, weak, fragmented, but unmistakable. Elias? Kane asked, stepping toward the console. Static. Then Rourke's voice, distant and strained. We did it, Kane. It's over. Kane swallowed hard. Where are you? A pause. Then softer, right where we need to be. The channel cut out. No static. No interference. Just gone. Kane stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty space where the Iron Requiem had been. He had fought wars, seen things no human should, but nothing had shaken him like this. A hand touched his arm. His first officer, looking at him with the same unspoken question everyone had. What now? Kane took a breath, steadying himself. Check the fleet, he ordered. Find out how many made it through. then set course for the nearest relay station. His officers moved, falling back into their routines, but Kane knew nothing would ever be the same. They had been on the edge of something far worse than war. And somehow humanity had survived. But deep down he knew the truth. The Iron Requiem was gone. But it wasn't destroyed. It was waiting. And one day, when the door began to crack open again, it would return.